saw a flourish in blots. This is a very long chapter, so I'm going to read half of it and then I will read the other half for the next day so you don't have to sit for 40 minutes listening to me read. Life at the Burrow was different as possible from the life on Privet Drive. The Dursleys liked everything neat and ordered. The Weasleys' house burst with strange and unexpected. Harry got a shock the first time he looked in the mirror over the kitchen mantelpiece, and it shouted, "Tuck your shirt in, Scruffy!" The ghoul in the attic howled and dropped pipes whenever he felt things were getting too quiet, and small explosions from Fred and George's bedroom were considered perfectly normal. What Harry found most unusual about life at Ron's, however, wasn't the talking mirror or the clanking ghoul. It was the fact that everybody there seemed to like him. Mrs. Weasley fussed over the state of his socks and tried to force him to eat 4 helpings at every meal. Mr. Weasley liked Harry to sit next to him at dinner, so that he could bombard him with questions about life with Muggles, asking him to explain how things like plugs and the postal service worked. "Fascinating," he would say as Harry was talking through about use of the telephone. "Ingenious, really, how those Muggles have found getting along without magic." Harry heard from Hogwarts one sunny morning, about a week after he had arrived at the Burrow. He and Ron went down to breakfast to find Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny already sitting at the kitchen table. The moment she saw Harry, Ginny accidentally knocked her porridge bowl to the floor with a loud clatter. Ginny seemed very prone to knocking things over whenever Harry entered the room. She dived under the table to retrieve the bowl, and then emerged with her face glowering like the setting sun. Pretending he hadn't noticed this, Harry sat down and took the toast Mrs. Weasley offered him. "Letters from school," said Mrs. Weasley, passing Harry and Ron identical envelopes of yellowish parchment paper addressed in green ink. "Dumbledore already knows you're here, Harry. Doesn't miss a thing or miss a trick, that man. You've got 2 of them, too," he added, as Fred and George ambled in their pajamas. For the first few minutes there was silence as they all read their letters. Harry told them to catch Hogwarts Express as usual at King's Cross Station on September 1st. There was also a list of new books that they needed to have for first years, or the coming year. Second-year students will require The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2, by Miranda Goshawk. Break with a Banshee, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Gadding with Ghouls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Holidays with Hags, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Travels with Trolls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Voyages with Vampires, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Wanderings and Werewolves, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Year with the Yeti, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Fred, who had finished his own list, peered over at Harry's. "You've been told to get all of Lockhart's books, too," he said. "The new Defense Art Stock teacher must be a fan. Bet it's a witch." At that point, Fred caught his mother's eye quickly, busied himself with the marmalade. "That lot won't come cheap," said George, with a quick look at his parents. "Lockhart's books are really expensive." "Well, we'll manage," said Mrs. Weasley, but the look worried her. "I expect we'll be able to pick up a lot of Ginny's things second-hand." "Oh, are you going to Hogwarts this year?" Harry asked Ginny. She nodded, blushing at the roots of her flaming hair. She put her elbow in the butter dish. Fortunately, no one saw this except Harry, because just then Ron's elder brother Percy walked in, and he was already dressed, his Hogwarts prefect badge pinned to his sweater vest. "Morning, all," said Percy briskly. "Lovely day." He sat down in the remaining chair, but leapt up almost immediately, pulling underneath him a molten gray feather duster. At least that's what Harry thought it was until it stopped breathing. "Errol," said Ron, taking the limp owl from Percy and extracting a letter from under its wing. "Finally! He's got Hermione's answer. I wrote her to say that we were going to try to rescue you from the Dursleys." He carried Errol to the porch, just inside the back door. He tried to stand him up on it, but Errol just flopped straight off it again. So Ron just let him on the draining board instead, muttering, "Pathetic." Then he ripped open Hermione's letter and read it out loud. "Dear Ron and Harry, if you're there. I hope everything went all right, that Harry is okay, and that you didn't do anything illegal to put him out. Ron, because that would get Harry into trouble, too. I've been really worried about Harry. Will you all please let me know at once? But perhaps it would be better if you used a different owl, because I think another delivery might finish your one off. I'm very busy with schoolwork, of course. How can she be? Ron said in horror. We're on vacation! And we're going to London next Wednesday to pick up my new books. Why don't we meet at Diagon Alley? Let me know what's happening as soon as you can. Love, from Hermione. Well, that fits in nicely. We can all get your things then, too, said Mrs. Weasley, starting to clear up the table. What are you all up to today? Harry, Ron, and Fred, and George were planning to go up the hill to a small padlock at the Weasleys owned. It was surrounded by trees and blocked from the view from the village below, meaning they could practice Quidditch there, as long as they didn't fly too high. They couldn't use real Quidditch balls, but they had been hard to explain if they had escaped or flown away over the village. Instead, they threw up apples at one another to catch, and they took turns riding Harry's Nimbus 2000, which was easily the best broom. Ron's old shooting style was often outstripped by the passing butterflies. 5 minutes later, they were marching up the hill, broomsticks in their hands, and they had asked Percy if he wanted to join them, but he had said he was too busy. Harry had only seen Percy at mealtime so far. He stayed shut into the rest of his room the rest of the time. Wish I knew what he was up to, said Fred, frowning. He's not himself. His exams results came the next day before you did. 12 owls! And he's hardly gloated at all. Ordinary wizarding levels, George explained, seeing Harry's puzzled look. Bill got 12 too. If we're not careful, we'll have another head boy in the family. I don't think I could stand the shame. Bill, the oldest, Weasley's brother, he had the next brother, Charlie, who had been left Hogwarts. Harry had never met either of them, but he knew Charlie was in Romania studying dragons, and Bill was in Egypt working for the Wizards' Bank in Gringotts. Dunno how Mum and Dad are going to afford all those book stuff this year, said George after a while. 5 sets of Lockhart books, and Ginny needs robes and wands and everything. Harry said nothing. He felt about awkward. Stored in underneath a vaulted Gringotts in London was a small fortune that his parents had left him. Of course, it was only the Wizarding World that he had money. He couldn't use galleons or sickles or nuts at the Muggle shops. He had never mentioned to Gringotts Bank to count to the Dursleys. He didn't think their horror of anything connected with magic would stretch as far as a large pile of gold. Mrs. Weasley woke them all early the following Wednesday. After a quick 6 bacon sandwiches each, they pulled up their coats, and Mrs. Weasley looked at the flower pot in the kitchen mantel. A piece of appeared inside. Oh, we're running low, Arthur, she sighed. We'll have to buy some more today. Ah, well, guess after you, Harry, dear. She offered him the flower pot. Harry stared at them all, watching them. What am I supposed to do? He stammered. He's never traveled by Floo powder, Ron said suddenly. Sorry, Harry, I forgot. Never? Said Mr. Weasley. But how did you get to Diagon Alley when you got your school things last year? I went on the underground. Really? Said Mr. Weasley eagerly. Were there escaptors? How exactly? Not now, Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley. Floo powder's a lot quicker, dear. My goodness me! If you've never done it before, it'll be all right, Mum, said Fred. Harry, watch us first. Each took a pinch of glittering powder out of the flower pot, stepped up to the fire, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar of the fire turned emerald green and rose higher than Fred, who stepped right into it and shouted, Diagon Alley! And vanished. You must speak clearly, dear, Mrs. Weasley told him. And Harry and George dipped their hands into the flower pot. And be sure to get out of the right gate. The grate. The right what? Said Harry nervously, as the fire roast and whipped George out of sight too. Well, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to choose from. You know, but as long as you've spoken clearly, it'll be fine, Molly. Don't fuss," said Mr. Weasley, helping himself to some Floo powder too. But, dear, if he got lost, how would we explain that to his aunt and uncle? "Ha! They wouldn't mind," Harry reassured her. "Dudley would think it was a brilliant joke if I got lost in a chimney. Don't worry about that." "Well, all right. You go after Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley. "Now, when you get into the fire, say where you're going, and keep your elbows tucked in," advised Ron. "Your eyes shut," said Mrs. Weasley. "The soot." "Don't fidget," said Ron, "or you might as well fall out of the wrong fireplace. Don't panic and get out too early. Wait until you see Fred and George." Trying hard to bear all this in mind, Harry took a pinch of took a deep breath of the powder and put it into flames and stepped forward. The fire felt warm, like a warm breeze. He opened his mouth immediately and swallowed a lot of ash. God, Alley, he coughed. It felt as though he were being sucked down into a giant drain. He seemed to be spinning very fast, and roaring in his ears was deafening. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the whirl of the green flames made him feel sick. Something had hard knocked his elbow, and he tucked it in tightly. Still spinning and spinning, now he felt as though his cold hands were slapping his face. Squinting through the glasses, he saw a blurred stream of fireplaces and snatched glimpses of rooms beyond. His bacon sandwiches were churning inside him. He closed his eyes again, wishing it would stop, and then he fell face forward on onto cold stone, and felt the bridge of his glasses snap. Dizzy and bruised, covered in soot, he got up gingerly to his feet, holding his broken glasses up to his eyes. He was quite alone. But where was he? He had no idea. All he could tell was that he was standing in some fuddy fireplace of what looked like a large, dimly lit wizard shop. But nothing in here was likely to be on Hogwarts school list. A glass case near with it was a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards. A staring glass eye, evil-looking mask stared down from the walls, and an assortment of human bones lay on the counter, and rusty, spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. Even worse, the dark, narrow street Harry could see through the dusty shop window was definitely not Diagon Alley. The sooner he got out of here, the better. His nose was still stinging where he had hit the hearth. Harry made his way swiftly and silently towards the door, but before he got halfway to it, two people appeared on the other side of the glass, and one of them was that of the very, very last person Harry wanted to meet, and he was covered with soot and wearing broken glasses. Draco Malfoy.